Do. I think we're time traveling now.
We might be. Yes, but Instagram is not with us now. Okay, now we're good. Okay. Hello. How are you?
Hello. How are you?
Welcome. I'm good. Welcome to Reading Between the Lines. This is Sarah, and I'm joined with. And I'm Ahren. Ahren and I. Exactly. Ahren and I are siblings, and Ahren is also in the UK. Well, no, you're not in the. You're not.
I'm in the Ireland. I'm in the Republic of Ireland.
That's right. We're not in the. That's not the UK.
We quit that in 1922.
Right. What?
I just had an interesting conversation with somebody about Michael Collins, of all people. He got a new movie poster. He's somebody on Facebook, and he does these YouTube videos, and he got this new movie poster for his favorite movie, Mars Attacks. Mm-hmm. And then it was this triangular poster, and so one side says Mars Attacks, the other side says Warner Brothers, and the other side says Michael Collins. He's like, as Liam Neeson is Michael, I don't know who Michael Collins is, and I commented, oh my gosh, he's a hero to the Republic of Ireland for helping us gain independence. And he's like, oh, okay. So then I read about who Michael Collins is, and apparently he got assassinated going to Cork because it was 1922, and in 1921 Ireland signed a treaty with the UK to have a ceasefire, but this was in August and he was shot in Cork, and then in December we gained our independence. So he was a general, I think, and a minister in the government.
His death was not in vain. So that's
he's buried at Glasnevin Cemetery too, which is a good tour to come on. Anyway, this is totally off topic. Sorry.
Well, we're already time traveling. We've gone back in time.
So. That's right. We've gone back in time to 1922.
The history of Ireland.
Yeah. So right, and so I learned something yesterday because I'm like, well, I'm an Irish citizen. I should really know who Michael Collins is. So
it's true.
Now I do.
So I wanted to make a note, which was we have chosen time travel as the theme for today. And as you and I were gathering our 3 favorite of all time travel books, mine have a theme. Do yours have a theme?
No, not really.
Well, thanks.
They're just the 3 books I've read recently that happen to be about time travel. I'm not quite sure that one of them is my favorite. But I mean, it's kind of like, how many romance novels have you read? Which are your favorites? And like, well, if I've only read 3, this is what I can talk about, which is kind of funny because you'd think I would have read more time travel books, but I seem to have I can only recall 3. So here they are.
I also thought that I had not read as many as I actually have. And I also the one that I will talk about, the first one that I'm going to talk about. I mean, I'll let you go first, but
okay.
I told you that I picked this book. No, I got it as a birthday present and I read it on a plane, and I didn't realize it was about time travel. So I was like accidentally reading about time travel. So
mine, I would rate, I'll go in order of stars, 3 out of 5 stars. Mm-hmm. My first one is a book called The Unexpected Gift of Joseph Bridgeman by Nick Jones in 2015. I'd rate that as 3 stars.
Okay.
The second one I want to talk about is called The Psychology of Time Travel by Kate Mascarenhas, 2018. I would give that 4 stars. And then one of my favorite books, it actually is a time travel book, and it's called Lightning by Dean Koontz, and I would rate that 5 stars. That came out in 1988.
I've never read a Dean Koontz, so I'd like to. Or maybe I'll read the one you're going to suggest.
I think there's been a TV series on Netflix called Odd Thomas. Have you heard of that?
There's a movie. I loved that movie, and the actor who played Odd Thomas passed away.
Oh,
very
no.
Young.
Yeah. So Dean Koontz wrote, I think there's 8 or 9 Odd Thomas books. The story is that he can see dead people, that movie. And the dead people are famous people, like the ghost of Elvis follows him around, or the ghost of Frank Sinatra follows him around, but they can't speak to him. He only just sees ghost image. And so they have to do charades. And like if Elvis is trying to like go like, come on, don't be such a pansy. Go talk to the girl. He has to pantomime like go, you know. Uh, and
That's
if
hilarious.
yeah, if Sinatra's mad, he'll just throw his drink at the wall.
It's
But
fantastic.
yeah, there's no sound, and so they have to do charades. Like, okay, 2 words, yes, okay. Anyway, yeah.
Well, start with your first one. We'll go there.
Okay, sure. So I think this one was self-published. Originally, it seemed to have been like one of those. There's some kind of like Amazon fiction serialized subscription service now. If you're a writer, you can put out regular serials. I think it
Oh, I
was
didn't
something
know
like
that.
that because this was originally published as Downstream, chapters 1 through 7.
Okay.
Joseph Bridgeman is a guy in the UK, and I think he suffers from depression and he's lost his job. He hasn't been working for a while, and he just can't motivate himself, and he suffers from insomnia. And he's like, well, he's running out of money, and he's got house payments, and I think his wife left him. And the world. It's a good book in that it starts with the protagonist is in like deep doo doo, like, oh boy, he's got problems.
Yeah.
He needs to fix his life and get it together. So by the end of the book, there is a character transformation, and that's good.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
there's some other aspects of the book I was kind of like, I didn't like the ending, and so that turned me off of reading the sequel.
Oh,
And in
yeah.
fact, there might be more. There might be 3 Joseph Bridgman books, but I just wasn't interested because I didn't like the ending. Was kind of like, oh my God, did you really do that to us? So anyway, I'll describe it briefly. So in 1992, young Joseph lost his sister Amy at some kind of like county fair. She disappeared, and that has affected him greatly. It's kind of like if we lost baby Sarah in Lake Tahoe in 1984, and I don't know, like that would affect me greatly. So
That would be
um,
terrible.
it would be terrible. Where's baby Sarah? Is Sarah in the car? So
True story. We'll tell
that's
that
another
one
story
later.
for another day. Yeah.
Uh,
So anyway, what he's a Beatles fan, and so all he does is he sits in his favorite armchair in the empty living room in the empty house now that his wife is gone. He puts on his Beatles album, and he drinks vodka, and he just kind of gets blotto, and he tries to sleep, and sometimes he might be able to actually sleep, but people are like, oh my God, you haven't come back to work, please come back to work. And just like, I think he runs an antique store or something like that. Like he just hasn't been motivated to like sell his
that's a
antiques.
cool job.
Yeah. So he starts having these episodes where he's listening to the Beatles, and he's trying this technique his psychologist gave him to try to like be mindful and meditate and try to
Mm-hmm.
be calm, and he's able to hypnotize himself. And then all of a sudden he wakes up and he sees himself in the house, and
Ooh.
himself goes and sits down in his favorite chair and then starts to meditate and then disappears. And so he sees himself time travel, and so he realizes like, oh my gosh, I've it's 20 minutes ago. What happened? Like he looks at the clock and he's like, no, I remember sitting down at 1 o'clock, and like what happened? So anyway, he time travels like twice, and he realizes he can go back a day. And he's like, wow, now what would you do if you could go back in time? And then he talks about, would you go and kill Hitler, which is kind of funny because that's part of the Teen Kuntz book. Is if you could time travel, would you go back and kill Hitler?
Yeah.
And so he realizes he can't go back very far. If you could only go back a day, what would you do? And so he realizes he could go back a day and solve all of his problems by buying the winning lotto ticket. Because
Okay.
then he wouldn't lose his house and he wouldn't lose his business, and he could make all of his back payments. And so he does, but so the method of time travel is he goes really hard and he hypnotizes himself, and bink, he disappears. And then he finds himself naked. He doesn't travel with his clothes. And so he goes, he's friends with the guy who owns the local vinyl record shop, And so he like finds himself like in that dude's store at 6 a.m. the previous day, naked. And then he's like, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit. What do I do? And because the alarm's going off at the
Oh my
store, and then
God.
the guy shows up and he's like, Bob, what are you doing in the store naked? And so the guy, like, he says, I must have been drunk and passed out. I'm really sorry for breaking into your store. I didn't steal anything, obviously, because I don't have anything on me. Nothing up my sleeve, no sleeve. And so his friend kind of sorts him out. And then he goes, gets him some clothes, and then he goes and buys the winning lotto ticket, but not to be suspicious. I think he gives it to his friend. And
Oh,
says, okay, you turn this in tomorrow and we'll split it, okay? And the guy's
yeah.
like, whatever. I just go home and go back to bed, Joe. And so anyway, he ends up winning the lottery, and then he starts being able to practice his time travel more. And he gets better at it. He can go back further. But the further back he goes, the less time he can stay there.
Oh,
So that method of time travel is kind of interesting. It's like, okay, he learns to go back a week, but instead of being able to stay there for 24 hours, he might only be able to stay there for 12 hours.
it's a
And
bit like astral projection as well. Like that.
yeah, kind of. So he thinks himself into the past,
Mhm.
and then blink, he's there. And he tries to go back further and further and further and further, and I think he figures out he can go back like almost a year, which he thinks is great. But he can't be there at the year for very long, like maybe an hour, okay,
Mm.
instead of, and so then he realizes that, okay, what if I go back the furthest I can go, and then do it again, and then jump again? So he goes back like a year, and then he manages to go back another year. And so eventually, by the climax of the book, I don't want to give it away, but
Yeah.
in order to be the book, I mean, he has to save his sister,
Yeah.
obviously. So you kind of expect, him to do that. And he's able to make a series of jumps and finally go back to that day in 1992 and figure out what happened to his lost sister at the mall, or the whatever, the
Fair, whatever it was.
county fair. Yeah. And the method of time travel in this one, he can't go forward, and he ends up saving his sister, and then bringing her. She lives, and then when he goes back to 2016, she's there, but
Okay.
and now the timeline has changed, and he doesn't remember any of it.
Right. How would he? Yeah.
Yeah, and so she's there in his house and putting a cold compress on his head and saying, Joe, are you awake? Are you okay? And his niece is there because his sister, grew up from being a kid and
Had a
got
normal
married and
life.
had a kid,
Yeah.
had a normal life. Yeah. And so she has to fill him in because he seems to have lost his memory. And
Mm.
so anyway, the thing at the end of the book I didn't like is that he's finally back in his antique shop, and he's like, okay, everything's great. My life is good again. And then suddenly a mysterious stranger appears in the door, and he says, Joseph, I need you to time travel, and you better do it because I'm going to make you. And Joseph's like, no, I'm done with time travel. And the guy is like, well, you may be done with time travel, but time travel is not done with you. Dun
That's
dun. And
lame.
then it's like, really? Did you? And I just thought that was so cheesy. I didn't want to read the sequel.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
can I mention something really quick about
Of course.
writing in general? Okay. So this guy, he's a really good science fiction author. His name is Orson Scott Card, and he's actually
Oh,
written
yeah.
books on how to write successful science fiction. One of his books, he coined this phrase called the mice quotient. There's another author, Mary Robinette Cowell, who
Mhm.
recently, there's a lecture on YouTube where she gives a lecture at some guy's writing course at BYU, and she discusses the mice quotient by Orson Scott Card. And she says, if you're writing a story, it's like parentheses. If you open a parentheses, you have to close it. And mice stands for milieu, which is like the setting. I is for inquiry or idea, like there's a question, who done it? You can't start a mystery and then not answer that question. Character, So like the character starts with a crappy life, and they do the right thing in this Joseph Bridgeman novel where he transforms and he solves his character problem. The character transforms. And then the fourth one is event, a catastrophe. So Independence Day, the movie, the aliens come, and then by the end of the movie, we get rid of them. So to me, this is like opening up a new parentheses at the end of the book and not closing it. And that I felt as a reader was a bit of a letdown. And I realized the author kind of violates this mice quotient. It's not like, the end of the first Back to the Future movie where Doc shows up and he says, Marty, we have to go to the future. But why, Doc? Everything is fine. No, it's fine with your life, but think of your children. Dun dun. And so that's
Yeah.
kind of fun. And then they get into the car and they go off into the sunset, which is okay, fine. I think that was an okay way to end that movie
Yeah.
because you wanted to read the sequel. I think the author was trying to do that here, but the attempt didn't really work out for me. So anyway, so that's why I rated it 3 stars. It's almost like if you have the world's best pilot and you are in your airplane and you are going from, San Francisco to New York, the flight could be perfect all the way to New York. And then if the landing is bumpy and hard, people are like, oh, that was a terrible flight.
It was a terrible flight.
Yeah.
Yep.
And he could have done everything right for 6 hours, but then a little boo-boo at the end, thump. It's like, that sucked. And so I think this book was pretty good until the end had a bumpy landing, and then it turned me off. So
I felt that way many times about a lot of different books. And
why did they end it that way?
Another podcast for us in the future, we're going to talk about books that we threw at the wall.
Yeah.
So, stay tuned for that. Right.
The not finished book. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to talk about the book that I read by accident on a plane recently. Okay. This is The Miracles of the Namiya General Store by Keigo Higashino.
Oh, it sounds like it might be set in Japan.
It is, you know me. Uh-huh. So this is a Japanese bestseller. It's translated for obviously, I don't need to say that. It's translated. And Keigo Higashino is a mystery and thriller writer. And this is not a mystery or thriller. And I feel like this is the first one that he's done that is a little more sci-fi. It's a little more like, it's not totally cozy, but it's just a more of a like slice of life kind of a novel. Okay. So interesting for him. So this was published
just for a second with a question. Yes. Have you seen The Big Lebowski?
Yes.
So that movie, it has such a great following. It's like a cult movie. Everybody loves it. And to me, I like it. I like, the actors are all really good.
Yeah.
But it's like, it seems like a bunch of stuff that happens to a guy.
It is that's also kind of a slice of life. Like what?
Yeah. And so I'm wondering if
takes place in a day or two.
Like it's all about the characters and how they interact with their environment and like
yes,
the dudes that stuff happens to and how they deal with the stuff.
Yes.
Would you say it's like that? Maybe.
Yes. Because it all takes place in one night, this book.
Oh, all right.
But of course we are time traveling, but still it takes place in one night. Okay. And I would say that kind of slice of life topic or theme is not for everybody. I really like it. And I noticed that there are also in Japan, there's a lot of anime that is slice of life anime that is extremely popular because it's kind of relaxing. It's kind of casual.
Okay.
But I digress. So
it's like this soft jazz with characters.
Yes. Yes. This was published September 24th in 2019 by Yen On, who is the publisher. So this is the setup. This is three criminals taking refuge in an abandoned general store after a robbery that goes wrong. Their car breaks down like during their getaway. And so they're like stranded in this random suburban neighborhood and they come upon this abandoned general store. And they're hiding out. It's all dusty. It's filthy. It's disgusting. And nobody's been here for 40 years. And wow. They suddenly have a a letter dropped through the mail slot. And they think, oh God, it's the cops. They know we're here. And so they open the letter and they realize that it's just a letter from somebody who's local asking for advice. And so the idea is that over the one night time span, they assume the role of the former store owners. He was very kind-hearted and offered thoughtful counsel to people in the neighborhood seeking guidance, but it was done anonymously. Kind
Oh,
of a
okay.
Dear Abby from this
Sure.
nice local old guy, in the 80s who had
I
this
actually kind
general
of like
store.
this premise. It
It's
sounds fun.
really
It's
it's
drawing
so,
you in
so
already.
it's so good.
Yeah.
So by morning, the lives of these 3 criminals are forever changed. The book, definitely this is like we start out in a crummy space and we're better at the end, sort of.
Yeah. So there's character transformation. That's a good novel.
Exactly.
Yeah. Most good novels have that. So
This is comprised first we kind of are each chapter where we're kind of learning about the setup of like these 3 dudes, and they're figuring out that they're getting these letters and they realize that these people are from a different time period. And also when they reply, they get an immediate response, but
oh
things have like time is passing in the 80s much faster. So does
oh.
that make I'm not anyway.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
it's like a time warp. I don't know if you've
A
ever seen
big
this
time warp.
horror. There's a horror movie called The Cube where they're in this torture chamber and in each room is a different way to die, kind of a thing.
Oh
And
God.
yeah, it's kind of gross. And one person escapes. Like, say there's 4 people. One person escapes and goes to the next room, and then they seem to come back in 5 minutes later, and they're like, oh my god, I finally found you guys, it's been 5 days. So time passes differently in each room of the cube.
Oh,
It's we
that's
and
fascinating.
Yeah, and the cube is a time tesseract, and so it's like an artificial like universe. And so each room they've sort of generated, and it's its own universe, and its own time passes at its own rate. It's yeah, kind of mind blowing, right? I didn't like the movie because it was mostly like creative ways to kill people that haven't been done
Ugh.
on film yet. So yeah, it was kind of
You
gross,
just
but
reminded me of another like honorable mention book that I
hmm.
wanted to talk about in a second. I have to write this down before I forget. The
Okay.
Horrible Triangle movie.
Oh yeah, you didn't like The Triangle. That was also a horror movie where the same kind of time. It's a time loop that's like an hour, and so these people come on the sailboat and they see an abandoned cruise ship from like the 70s or something. And then they go on the cruise ship, and then an hour later they see their own boat again come and themselves get on the cruise ship, and then things happen to them, and then an hour later it happens again, and so they're in
It
this
just
weird.
keeps looping and people are
Yeah,
dying
and at
over and
one
over
point,
again.
right, and the protagonist lady, she goes into one room and she's running and she trips and she falls, and there's a metal grate in the room, and her golden necklace, her little chain, comes
Yeah.
off, and it falls down the grate, and then she looks down and she sees a
Oh
hundred
God.
identical gold chains down in the grate, and they're all hers. And she realizes like this has been happening over and over and over again, the same
Ah.
people. Yeah.
So
No, I liked the technical aspects of Triangle. I think the story, like a lot of time travel books and movies, the story can be really difficult to follow because our
yeah.
brains aren't meant to follow it. There's a really fantastic movie that I like. I actually wrote down and I wanted to talk about. I don't want to like hijack what you were
That's
talking
okay.
about. It is called Primer. It came out in 2004. Shane Carruth is the author.
Mhm.
Um, the movie was fantastic. I only learned about it because I was like Googling time travel, and a flowchart popped up for the movie Primer where it
Yeah.
explains different timelines and how they
Oh my
intersect with
God.
each other. And like
Yeah.
the character Aaron goes this way, and then Bonk goes to the other timeline and meets up with Abe, but Abe doesn't know that it's second Aaron and not first Aaron. And I was fascinated by this schematic. and I really studied it hard, and I was like, I really want to see this movie. And I think you have to read the instructions first, read the roadmap first before you watch the movie. I don't think a lot of people liked the movie at first because they were like, what is going on? And you don't realize the person you see on screen might be a person from further in the movie who went back. So it's
Mm,
not
yeah,
the
that's too
same
much for
time.
my brain.
It's future person coming back, and current person doesn't realize that he's talking to future person. He thinks he's still talking to current person. But once you kind of read the genius of the schematic, apparently this guy Shane Carruth said, I spent a year editing this film, so it was the consistency, the coherence
Oh, wow.
worked, and he said that was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, making this film coherent and following this chart. So yeah, that's the problem with a lot of time travel movies, is that our brains don't cogitate, and we're not
They could
thinking.
get really wacky really
Very
quickly. And
convoluted. Yeah.
I wrote down another one that I just thought of as well. So, but anyway,
Okay.
okay. So back to, what are we talking about? We are
The
talking
Japanese
about,
one, where
yeah,
they're in the 80s
miracles.
and yeah.
Yeah, they're in the 80s. The miracles of the Namiya
Mm,
general store. Okay, so what happens here? The criminals all have very different personalities, from not too bright
mm,
to very kind-hearted, and then the third one is kind of a criminal mastermind who's very angry.
mm.
They each debate and argue about how best to respond to each letter that they get, and so they take turns, which can be
Oh,
confusing because these people in the 80s think that they're talking to just one
the
dude,
same guy, right. It's like,
and
"Oh, you got
he's
an
now
attitude
got,
today."
yeah, 3 different personalities. They
Alright.
soon realize that the automatic replies that they get back, they truly are affecting these lives,
Oh,
uh,
wow. Yeah,
of
sure.
these people
You give
based
them
off of
advice and they did it, and they're like,
they
"Uh-oh."
and things change in their timeline. In the present timeline, things have
Oh,
changed. So,
okay.
then here's the other thing. I was on a plane and I got up at like 2:30 in the morning to get to the airport,
Yeah.
and I was a little emotionally exhausted. I cried after each freaking chapter of this
Wow.
book on the plane. I was
Your
so moved.
your psychology was just raw by the time you're done with the
I
flight.
I was just like so emotionally exhausted in many ways.
Wow.
So there's, I don't know if it was just because I was really, really tired or it was
Yeah,
that good, because I
yeah,
usually don't blubber on a plane
sure.
after a chapter. So anyway, I thought this was so, so good. All of the lives, all of the stories, everything is interconnected. I do love that. That's
Yeah.
so good. I have this book, so I'll just mail it to you.
Oh, fantastic. Our cousin Eric really liked a book called Rashomon. And I don't think it was a time travel book, but it was a perspective book where each chapter of the book is the same retelling of a crime that happened from a different perspective of one of the people involved in the crime.
Is it a true crime or no?
No, I think it's a
This is
novel. It's
fiction.
called
Okay.
Rashomon, and it's a very famous Japanese novel.
Oh, well, good Lord. Okay. I
But
need to
but,
read that.
yeah, and so it's from each person's perspective, and the event is different with every person, and
Mhm.
it's kind of like, witnesses to a crime giving a testimony. Sometimes they're manufacturing their own memory, and so you get 2 people who saw the same car accident, and they'll tell you
Right.
different things, or the driver was different, or the color of the car was different, or the
Hmm.
time of day was different. So you get all these different accounts, and so it must be very hard for like a judge in a trial to figure out
Oof.
what
Yeah.
information is actually real.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so I don't know. Everybody's perspective is their own, but what I see might not have been what you saw, even though we both saw the same thing.
I wanted to also mention that these 3 characters also, I don't think this is giving things away. There
Mm,
is an a there's an orphanage for children
mhm.
that plays a central, it's also its own character in
Oh,
this novel,
okay.
and everybody who was a child in the 80s, even our criminals,
Mm,
are transformed toward the end through this, and, like,
okay.
their lives started out really crummy, and then anyway, it's
Interesting.
very much like a time loop. that is actually happening here.
Wow, that's great.
So anyway, okay, your turn.
Well, just as an aside, the third
Mhm.
book I want to talk about, Lightning by Dean Koontz, an orphanage, is very key in that book as well, which is kind of interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's weird.
So I'll talk about the second one.
Okay.
I would rate this like 4 stars out of 5.
Mhm.
Part of it was like pretty complicated and difficult to follow, because there's 6 main characters, and you're kind of there's a perspective shift all the time. Like one chapter might be Ruby, and one chapter might be Grace, and one chapter might be Odette, and it's like,
Yeah.
okay, now I'm seeing this person's version of the story. They're all trying to like solve a mystery, and so it's like having a mystery with 6 different Sherlock Holmeses trying to solve it.
Yeah.
Anyway, I liked the book. I thought it was well done. Anyway, so The Psychology of Time Travel by Kate Mascarenhas, 2018. The publisher is Head of Zeus Limited.
Good grief. That is
Yeah.
we're gonna have a publishing
That's a
company.
great name for
Yeah.
a publisher. We've gone from self-published to Head of Zeus.
Wow.
Anyway, wow.
Medusa's wine cup.
Yeah, and then the Dean Koontz book was published by Penguin Random House. So I'm like,
Yay, Penguin.
we've gone from nobody to who and to, oh yeah, I know you.
Okay.
Okay, so in 1967, 4 women invent a time travel machine, and the women are Margaret, Lucille, Grace, and Barbara. But we don't call her Barbara; we call her B in the whole novel.
Okay.
So the story follows these 4 women and the invention of time travel. And then the story moves to Barbara's granddaughter, Ruby, and she learns about a murdered woman. And it's a locked room mystery.
Oh.
Okay. And then also the story follows Odette, who was like this student intern who, goes down the stairs to the locked basement and finds the murdered woman. And so she discovers the body in the basement, and then Odette tries to solve the mystery. So it's got multiple POVs of characters. One of the characters is a lesbian. All of the characters are women. There's probably only like mention of two men in the entire story.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
One of the reviews I read said the author, I guess, was male, and he said, this book focuses on women characters. And he says, he has a hard time with feminist fiction. But for this one, it wasn't really, I mean, it was okay. For him, it was like, well, it's just a story, and all of the characters happen to be female. So it wasn't like trying to, a lot of feminist fiction might try to make a point that it's feminist fiction. And this one just happened to be, it's kind of like if you have an army story, but it's all of the soldiers are women, like, oh, okay, whatever.
Yeah.
And so it didn't detract at all the fact that it's feminist fiction or whatever.
Yeah.
So so that author, I mean, that reviewer said it was okay. He actually thought, the technical aspects of the book were really good, and it's not in your face, and it doesn't detract from the story. So what I got out of the book was there's this group called, the government in the future is called the Conclave. And Odette is just kind of this student. Yeah, I know. It's like the Federation,
Jeez. Yeah, landed on a thick there.
Odette finds this poor woman and murdered, and she knows that it has something to do with time travel. And then it's sort of near future, and time travel is just kind of like a normal thing in this universe now.
Yes.
It's sort of like you can go to the Tate Modern in London and see art exhibits about the future. For example, here's a pen as it's brand new, but this pen is actually now, here's an identical pen next to it. It's the same pen 50 years in the future, and it's all worn, and it's got scrapes and scratches on it. And so the object is sitting next to itself in this art exhibit, and it's sort of like the future of wabi sabi, of how things age and have a patina. One of the characters in this book, Grace, who was one of the original inventors, she's talking to Ruby about Oh yeah, I love future me. I've gone to several Christmases with future Grace, and boy, she's a riot, you know. And so like younger her goes and visits Granny her, and Granny her is a spicy old lady, you know, and
No.
has lots of stories to tell. And other hers show up too. So, you know, 25-year-old Grace shows up, and then 45-year-old Grace shows up, and they have Christmas with 80-year-old Grace, and all of the
Wow.
Graces just have, you know, their party and their Christmas, and they talk about their lives. And so that's like normal. So I guess you can, in this time travel book, they don't really explain the method of time travel. The TARDIS or whatever is just sort of it's a magic box
Whoosh,
that
whoosh.
the thing has to do with physics, you know. And so that you can go forward in the future and you can go backwards in the past, and nothing will change. You can't change it. So
That's interesting.
if someone gets murdered in the future, then you know you can't go back and kill Hitler. Kill Hitler. It's like something will
Right.
stop you because you're always in your timeline.
Okay.
You can't get out of it. And so it's almost like everything that has happened, and then the reverse of that, everything that will happen also has happened just in the future, interestingly. So you can't get
Okay.
out of it. So, you know, now pencil will always be future pencil, and
Okay.
it just is. But so anyway, the book was pretty good. Odette infiltrates the conclave. She manages to go into like their astronaut selection program, but
Yeah.
it's the time traveler program. And so
Yeah.
they do things like they'll go back in time to go witness a historic event, or they'll go in the future to see what technologies happen and
See,
whatever. Or
my next book that I'm going to talk about is similar in
okay.
that concept.
Yeah, and so they eventually solve the mystery. The thing about this book that several reviewers found difficult was um, there's several different timelines that you're following, and also a different character you're following. Excuse me a second. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's difficult to follow all of the characters and all of the different times.
Yeah.
But again, if you go, it's probably the kind of book where it's like Primer. If you go back and watch it a second or third time, it just kind of goes, oh, all those puzzle pieces just kind of meshing together. You see the beauty of
Yes.
it, which is hard to see the big picture in the first reading or first viewing.
Okay. That makes perfect
So
sense.
not a bad book. I don't
Okay.
think it was. I think it got like 4 stars on Goodreads, not 5 stars. Mind blowing, but
Yeah.
you know, it's not. It wasn't bad. I think this was her first novel too, which isn't a
I
bad
really think that the
prospect
whole
for a new
premise
writer.
is really original, except maybe it's not but to me it seems very original.
Well,
Um,
the locked room mystery has to do with time travel. And
is
I
this
don't
the
want to give
one
away.
with the toy?
Yes, yeah, it
Okay, okay,
has to
okay.
do with a toy in a toy factory, and the toy itself is a time travel toy, which is interesting.
That's like a
But then it
crucial
was,
detail that you did not mention.
oh, well, I don't want to give it away. That's the
Okay,
part of
okay.
the, so
Okay.
I don't want to tell you who done it, but yeah, the mystery has to do with a recalled toy because it had a little problem.
Okay, this got so
Yeah.
much more interesting. Right, that didn't come out right. Say
Yeah,
the title again.
sure. It's called The Psychology of Time Travel, and the author
Okay.
is Kate Mascarenhas, Mascarenhas. I think she's half Irish and half from some Caribbean island. It's interesting
That's
background
very
for her.
interesting.
Yeah, and one of the characters is also like a part Caribbean person too,
Oh,
which is
cool.
yeah. So we've yeah, I liked the book. It wasn't like the best book I've ever read, but it wasn't the
But
worst either.
still,
So
locked room time travel. That's interesting.
yeah, it's like
So,
a sci-fi and a cozy mystery combined.
yeah,
It's an interesting genre, you know.
it's really cool.
And
Okay.
also, you know, feminist literature too. Which is like it's
Yeah,
okay. It's got three things that it's trying to be, but it seems to work for all three, which is pretty good.
that's good. And it was written
Yeah,
by a man.
a woman, Kate.
Oh, sorry, Kate. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. Sorry. Okay. Sea of Tranquility is my next one by Emily St. John Mandel. Are you
Mhm.
familiar with her? She
I
wrote
I am not. Sea of Tranquility is a location on the moon, though. I think where we
Yes, it
landed.
is.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
So she wrote Station 11, which was really popular a couple years ago, about kind of a post-apocalyptic dystopian kind of a
I
situation.
love dystopian novels. Oh, we should do
Yeah.
that for another
Yeah.
another. I've
Just
read 3 different dystopian novels that I really enjoyed, so I could talk about
same.
those.
Okay. Let me write this down real quick. I used
It's
to
another genre to go over. Sure. Actually, when I was in high school, I took a summer English class, uh, and we read fiction by California authors, and one of the authors happened to have written this apocalyptic novel where apparently
Um,
the dude was camping in like Tahoe or something, and he got bitten by a rattlesnake, and then it was feverish for 5 days, and then when he finally is, emerges and his fever's passed, and he emerges from the cabin, and like everything's demolished. It's a nuclear war has happened, but he was safe in the mountains of Lake Tahoe, and he meets like a few survivors, and then he eventually becomes like the leader of this tribe, and all of the children are just kind of like the wild kids from Mad Max, talking about the before times.
yeah,
And
before times. Yes.
yeah, and so he and this woman are like the only two people that remember what life was like, back when
Oh my
cars worked,
gosh.
record players spun, and that kind of thing. So yeah, it was pretty fun. I liked but that was the weird premise. Oh wait, no, it wasn't. It wasn't a nuclear war. I'm sorry. No, there was a virus that went through and killed everybody, and that's why everybody who had ever been bitten by a rattlesnake in the past survived.
Survived.
Few people. That's why. Yeah,
So cool.
yeah.
Interesting.
Anyway, so go ahead. Sorry, you're talking
Okay.
about the Sea of Tranquility.
Sea of Tranquility. This was May 5th, 2020 by Knopf, Emily St. John Mandel. This actually was the Goodreads Choice Award for Science Fiction in 2022.
Oh, it's fantastic.
And this is not hard-boiled sci-fi. And
Mm.
I also have to say, with Station 11, I hated it and I
Oh,
didn't finish it. And
okay.
I decided that just Miss Emily St. John Mandel was just not for me. But I picked this up because the premise sounded so interesting.
Mm.
And I gave it 5 stars. So there you go.
Cool.
Okay. So this is more like magical realism with a technology twist, and we are time traveling. So similar to the book that you just mentioned, like we've created and invented time travel. It's a
Mm.
thing. We regulate it. The government has their own little agency and department, not called the whatever
The
name
conclave.
the
Yeah.
conclave. No, the conclave is not in this book, but it's very similar. And the government oversees it, and that's really all you need to know. Like that's all the technology and
Yeah.
physics you need
Okay.
to understand. So, Sea of Tranquility takes you on a journey. There's some art involved. There's love. There's a plague, and we start off in 1912 on Vancouver Island, and
Oh,
then we move through time 500 years to a lunar colony. Hence,
wow.
Sea of Tranquility.
Okay.
But so this is a really weird premise, so just bear with me. This starts out with 18-year-old Edwin St. Andrew. He's exiled from society, and he happens to hear a mysterious violin playing while he's taking a walk in a forest. And
Okay.
then fast forward 2 centuries, we meet Olive, and she's a famous writer, and she is from a moon colony. And she's on a book tour back on Earth. And her
Mhm.
novel describes similar scenes, a scene with a violinist experiencing a blip in time while at an airship terminal.
Mhm.
So we're starting to realize that like there's this violin thing happening, but it is the same blip in time is being explained. It's been explained since 1912. This
Oh, okay.
phenomenon,
Yeah.
it's like an anomaly. So there's a
Yeah.
detective investigating this anomaly, um, and he discovers that all the characters, their lives are intertwined. The pandemic is involved. It's really blending time travel and metaphysics in a way that is not too hard on your brain.
Yeah.
It is a slow burn kind of a book. This captures the essence of like present day emotions and concerns that we have, like with germs and the environment and where are we going to live in 500 years. It's very warm and it's very intellectual, this book. So the ending of this book made my brain explode.
Wow. Okay. So good ending.
It was good, really good ending
Not
that
confusing.
I didn't understand it, but I'm not as smart as you, so I think you'll
Oh.
be able to understand it.
Well, it's like the ending of the 2001: A Space Odyssey with this monolith and then the star baby floating through space, and you're like,
Yes.
"What did I just watch?"
Exactly. This
Nobody
is much
understood
like
the
that.
ending of that, but everybody was blown away by it.
I was trying to buy this book for you for your birthday, but for some
Oh,
reason I
thanks.
couldn't get like a hardback copy of it. They just don't exist.
Yeah.
But I was able to send one to Tomoko, so I sent one
Cool.
to Japan. So she is very sorry, Tomoko. She's slow about reading her books. So in 2 years, Tomoko, when you finish this, let me know
Wow.
what you thought. So
She's a busy lady. She's got kids
she's
to take
very
care of.
busy.
Sure.
She's a mom.
I'm
She's
sure of
got
that.
stuff to do.
Yeah, exactly.
Plus, I mean, she's reading it in English. I'm not buying this book for her in
Right.
Japanese. So,
Yeah.
it makes her brain work harder. Okay.
Sure.
One more thing I wanted to mention with
Yeah.
honorable mentions. So as we are making recommendations or just sharing different books about time travel, there are different genres of time travel, which we're kind
Okay.
of already discovering.
Yeah.
I mean, we've talked about like the mystery aspect of time travel books. We've talked about like cozy slice of life time travel. There are like Matt Haig, who wrote Midnight Library.
Mm.
The premise of his book, I think you read that. Mom said you read it. I don't know if you remember it right now. But anyway, he wrote a book about like, what if you could go back in time and like live the path you didn't choose.
Oh,
I
sure.
hate those kind of books. So that's not for me, but some
Okay.
people, that book was extremely popular. There's also kind of a romance aspect with The Time Traveler's Wife by Audrey Niffenegger, and they made
Okay.
it into a movie. And then we've talked about time travel as a horror genre with The
Oh,
Triangle.
right.
So,
What's interesting is I called Hodges Figgis on Dawson Street yesterday because I wanted to go buy a copy of Lightning. And I said, do you have Lightning by Dean Koontz? And they said, well, let me check the horror section. And I said, horror? No, it's a
horror.
science fiction book about time travel. But they keep, in Ireland, I called a couple
Yeah.
different bookstores and they all keep Dean Koontz in the horror section. I don't get it.
I'm okay with
Todd
that.
Thomas is not horror, right? But I think he wrote this book called Demon Seed, which was in the 70s and it was made into a movie. And it's kind of, that is a horror movie because it's about a house that's an AI run house. And then it locks this woman in and then impregnates her and makes her give birth to a robot baby. It's like, that was horror. That was 70s horror. So it's like, she gets trapped by the house and gives birth to the Borg, because AI wants to, procreate and make more AI. That was kind of like.
I read a really great book about like that Mom recommended. It's about an AI house,
Okay.
but there's nothing too creepy about it. It was like a murder mystery. But anyway,
There's
I'll
a
have to figure
few
out what that
AI
book was.
house movies, and they're all horror movies. Like AI wants to
Yeah.
murder everybody. So
They're always made of glass.
interesting.
Anyway, your turn.
Well, you mentioned the previous book has something to do with a violin, and I know this movie. Mom and I saw it at like the Guild Theater in Menlo Park when it came out, and it's sort of an indie movie. In German, I think it's called Der Rote Geiger. It's the movie is called The Red Violin.
Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
That's very popular.
it's a great movie, and the story follows a violin and who owns it through time. And it
Yes.
starts in, like the 1600s or whenever Stradivarius was making violins, and this man's wife dies, and he's so distraught, he drains her blood and
Right, and paints the
paints this
violin.
violin, and so her blood is the lacquer of this red violin. The rota is German for red, and Geiger, I
Yeah.
guess, is violin. But and so it follows like the creation of it, and then this dude in the 1700s who plays it like a fiend, and he's fantastic. And then somebody owns it in the 1880s, and then now modern times it's at a Sotheby's auction and somebody buys it, and so you follow the lives of the owners of the violin through time.
Yeah.
So it's almost a time travel movie of an object and its life.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so you could think of it that way. I mean, we're only traveling forward in time because that's what you can do. It's interesting though, the various techniques or methods, or I don't know what you want to call it, of time travel in the different stories. The Joseph Bridgeman book, he just kind of hypnotized himself, and it was a magic kind of
astral projection
deal. Time travel. That movie I was talking about, Primer, these guys are in their garage, like Bill Hewlett and William Packard trying to invent stuff in their garage, and they're trying to invent antigrav and make objects lighter. And they put this object in a chamber, and they turn on their electromagnetic whatsits, and it kind of works and kind of doesn't, and they're not quite sure what's going on, but they find out that objects seem to age after being in the chamber. Like they put in, like, remember a Weeble Wobble, those plastic toys, Weeble Wobble, but they don't fall down. They put one of those in and try to levitate, and then it levitates the Weeble Wobble, and then they have it in there for 5 minutes, and then they turn it off, and then
the plastic's all aged and yellowed.
Well, yeah, and then they come back the next morning, and the Weeble Wobble has this like weird slime of bacteria on it, and the plastic's gone from white to very, very, bromine yellow, kind of like old computers get yellowed and stuff. And they take it to a friend who's a biochemist at the university. They said, "Can you just tell us what's going on with this?" And the guy gets angry at him. He said, he analyzes it and he goes, "This is a joke. Don't bring this crap to me anymore. Just get out of my sight." He says that it's impossible that this is a Weeble Wobble because it's got 100 years of bacteria growth on it. I don't know what this joke is, but get out of my sight. And what they realize is it's a point A to point B time travel. So your time travel is when you start the machine, you can only go back to the point in time at which you started the machine. And so when you turn it off, it's point B. And there's a field in the inside, and all of the electrons or whatever that have gone from point A to point B, when you turn off the machine, they start traveling from point B back to point A. And they bounce back and forth repeatedly as long as the field is there. And then eventually, after overnight, the field dissipates. And
wait, is this the book that you read?
No,
that you recommend?
No,
Okay.
Movie Primer.
It's like, this sounds amazing.
It is amazing, and what it's based on is the theory that electrons, they have a negative charge, are moving forward in time, and positrons that have a positive charge are electrons moving backward in time. They're the same thing. It's the same. So there's like a one electron theory that like protons are really electrons just traveling in a different section of time. And then so the guys realize if they can go again, manipulate the stock market and buy lotto tickets. And so what they do is they get like oxygen, like for hospitals, and they sit they start the machine at 8 a.m, and then they have a timer, and then they get out at like 6 p.m. And oh no, they turn the machine off at 6 p.m. But they have to. Yeah, that's right. So what they do is in the morning, they turn it on at 8 a.m. and then they go to work and have a normal day.
I get what
At 6 p.m. they go and turn the machine off, and then they get in it. And then they have to stay there until the time limit to back to point A. And then when they get out again, it's 8 a.m. again.
Right.
And then they go to the library and research stocks, and then they start buying stocks.
I see.
Yeah. So and then they live the same day over again. But they can only go
Oh,
back to the point at which they turned the machine on.
I get it.
So
Interesting.
my third book, Lightning by Dean Koontz, the premise of that book is you can only go forward. You can't go back in time.
Oh, okay.
And the upshot of it, I'll kind of give away a little bit of it. So minor spoiler: the time travel is a Nazi soldier from 1944 who travels forward to, 1988,
Okay.
and he's trying to figure. He's in this secret time travel project, and they're trying to figure out how Germany can win the war, because they realize whatever time they go forward to, Germany's lost, and they're
Mhm.
trying to change it. They're trying to figure out what can we do to change it. And the story. Let me look at my note here for a second. This
And
is
when was this
actually
published?
1988, Penguin Random House, Dean Koontz, and the book is called Lightning. It follows a woman, a young girl named Laura Shane. She's born in 1955 during a freak lightning storm. And then you find out later that every time the guy turns on his time travel, it's a bzz, bzz, lightning everywhere. It's almost like the Terminator movie. When
Yes.
Arnold goes back in time, it's lightning everywhere, and then the ball appears, whoomph, and then he's like, naked Arnold, because apparently another naked time travel movie.
Again, clothes don't do well in
Can't
time
bring your
travel.
clothes. Yeah. So anyway, there's this girl is born during a freak lightning storm, and they're kind of in a rural area, and they have to call the local doctor, town doctor, right? And he's a drunkard, and a mysterious blonde stranger, his name is Stefan, he appears,
Chiffon.
and he stops the drunk doctor from attending the childbirth. He won't let the drunk guy deliver the baby. And
Um,
so young Laura they manage to, the birth is all right. She comes out perfect and fine and perfectly healthy. The mother dies in childbirth.
okay.
Very. And then, so Laura is raised by her dad, who has a convenience store. When she's 8 years old, the store is robbed by a junkie. And then the same blonde stranger appears again, and he saves them. And then he tells
Mm.
them, "This is what you say to the police when they show up." And they say all the right things. And
So they're kind of being groomed by
yeah,
this blonde person.
right. So again, in 1967, her father dies, and then at the funeral, she sees the same blonde man again at the funeral, and she's, like 12 years old. She thinks this blonde man is her guardian angel.
Oh gosh.
He
Okay.
keeps he keeps appearing at, hard times in her life.
Mhm.
So unfortunately, now her mom's
Yeah.
dead and her dad's dead. So she goes to an orphanage and she befriends these twins, Thelma and Ruth. Um,
Are they creepy?
No, they're wonderful. They're great kids. And later in
Darn.
the
Okay.
story,
Okay.
she's best friends with Thelma, and Thelma helps her with the time traveler Stefan. So she becomes
Okay.
instrumental in solving the issue.
Cool.
She goes to live at the orphanage, and she befriends the twins, Thelma and Ruth. Unfortunately, at the orphanage, there's a groundskeeper, Willie, the maintenance man custodian, whose name really is Willie, like from The Simpsons, groundskeeper Willie.
Oh yeah.
Right. He's at the orphanage, and unfortunately, he is a child molester. And Willie becomes infatuated with Laura because she's apparently beautiful, and he pretty much haunts her. Um, Thankfully, before groundskeeper Willie gets her, she's adopted by foster parents. But unfortunately, the foster parents are jerks and they exploit her. They just keep her like in the closet under the stairs, and like Harry Potter, and they just take the
Yeah.
money from the government. So she starts behaving badly so that they get sick of her, and so she can go back to the orphanage. And then, unfortunately, groundskeeper Willie tries to get her, but guardian angel Stefan, the blonde German soldier, comes and beats the living crap out of Willie. So he stays away from young Laura.
Yeah.
So eventually, Laura is adopted again, but Willie can't get her off his mind, and he goes to see her at the new
Ah.
foster parents. And this time, Laura kills him. Unfortunately it's like her whole childhood is like a series of unfortunate events.
It's awful.
Yeah, but this is one of the things I love about Dean Koontz novels is there's always action. The story is always moving forward, and his stories are fast. And I try, if in my own writing, to try to emulate his writing style, where it doesn't get bogged down in, like J.R.R. Tolkien describing, the whole language of the elves. It's kind of like, okay, just shoot the arrows at the orcs and get moving. So, okay, fine. Laura goes back to live at the orphanage, but by this time there was a fire at the orphanage, and what's her name?
Are the twins gone?
Thelma's sister Ruth died in the fire, so now it's only Thelma, which is very sad. Yeah, it's very sad. But Thelma and Laura are very close, and eventually, Laura grows up and she goes to college, and she, gets married, and they have a kid. And then again, there's some event, an accident happens.
And Stefan shows up.
Stefan saves them from the whole family dying from the car accident, which is great. But then somebody comes and appears, and they try to kill Stefan. Uh-oh. And so Laura's son grapples with the guy, and the other guy shoots Laura's son, and eventually, but in the middle of this, Stefan knocks him out and then gets the other guy. And it turns out the other guy is also another German soldier who's decided that they want to get Stefan because they don't like what he's doing. And so Stefan says, all right, I have to take care of this guy. I'll be back. But he has a malfunction with his time machine. It doesn't come back in 5 minutes. It comes back in a year. And the next time Laura sees him, he's got like a gunshot, and he's woozy, and so she now saves him, and she kind of resurrects him and treats his wounds, and then he explains the whole thing that's going on is that back in a different timeline, he had gone forward from 1944, and he found these wonderful books written by Laura. And her story was that she was quadriplegic. This drunk doctor at her birth, used the forceps and broke her neck. And so young baby Laura grew up quadriplegic, but she became a famous writer. And her stories were so moving that Stefan decided to renounce his Nazi mission. And he didn't want Germany to win, because then these books wouldn't get written. And so he's become her savior, of the guardian of his favorite author. And so eventually there's the story is like Stefan gets healed and he's back, but now the Nazis are after him because they realized he's, forsaken his mission. And then they try to, there's a scene where the Nazis come and they kill Laura. And Stefan is like, oh crap, I can't let that happen. And so he goes back in time and he puts this jar of some kind of nerve agent at the place where Laura is going to get killed, with a note on it that says, spray it, bad guys. So he sets it up so that when the bad guys come, she can save herself. And it's kind of like a Groundhog Day a couple times.
This is very similar with the Sea of Tranquility, where our detective, he kind of becomes not obsessed, but he really appreciates the author, who's one of the other main characters.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And he kind of manipulates events a little bit for her benefit.
Yeah. Oh, right. That's exactly what Stefan is doing in Laura's life. He's rearranging events to save Laura. He eventually, I don't want to do too many spoilers, but he goes back and tells Churchill where to bomb the secret Nazi time travel lab. And so Hitler can't win. And so he doesn't really go back and kill Hitler. He can't really manage that, but he at least stops the time travel thing. And I guess my point is, with this, he can only time travel forward.
Right.
And he from 1944, when he turns on his time machine, he can go to future times that haven't happened yet, and he
Okay.
can see what they're like. Um, but that's always the time from 1944, that timeline. And
So,
if he goes and he changes something, he
mm,
can go to the new timeline where Laura lives in the
mm,
future. Okay.
okay.
He can continue doing that. So, but yeah, that's kind of an interesting. He can only move forward from when he turns the time machine on, which is very similar to Primer.
Yeah.
So
Ooh, okay. Well,
can't go back in time. You can only time Primer is you can go back in time to the time you turn the machine on, and so Stefan can
mhm.
go back to 1944 when he turned his machine on, and then try again. So
S
he does these repeated jumps in the future to various spots of Laura's life.
I love how creative all of these authors are with, like, how the
Yeah.
rules of time
Yeah, there's a lot
travel.
of different rules and dynamics
Yes.
of the world rules of how you're gonna allow, time
Yes.
travel or
So,
space travel or whatever sci-fi you're doing.
my last book
Mm,
with time travel has a lot of very specific rules about
okay.
how you do it.
Yeah.
So, okay, sorry, this is another Japanese one. This is
That's all right.
Before the Coffee Gets Cold. Did you read this one?
Before the coffee gets cold. No, I haven't.
Okay.
The other one, I think mom might have been thinking about Midnight Texas.
I don't
That's
know.
that's the one, where everybody who lives in this town is either a psychic or they're a vampire or they're a were-lion or something. Everybody or like a witch who actually does like her Wiccan stuff. She can really cast real spells.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And I think it was made into another like a movie or a TV show, Midnight Texas. Oh, Midnight Crossroads. That
Okay.
was the first
Midnight
book anyway.
Texas.
Yeah, well, that's the name of the town is Midnight Texas.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, and
Well,
there's
that
like
sounds really
3 of
good
these.
too.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I really like that. Like all the characters are pretty dynamic and different in that one. But
I wonder, so my friend Bo Reed writes books that are like a little bit like that, where she's got like, you know, like all, the vampires and the werewolves and the whatevers, they all live in the same town and
yeah,
are kind of coexisting. And she might really like that book, so I should
this
recommend
the
it.
author of Midnight Crossroads was Charlene Harris, by the way.
Oh yeah, the Buffy, no, those vampire
She's written a
books.
lot of really good things, and
Yeah,
she's very popular. Yeah, so
she's funny. She writes.
yeah, yeah, and so
She's really
she's
fun.
similar to
Funny.
Dean Koontz in that the stories all have action, but they're all kind of funny too. I mean, there's a humor in Dean
Yeah,
Koontz book. Yeah.
I love that. It makes it more interesting too. I think it's
Mhm,
kind of
mhm. One
okay.
of the things that I
Mhm.
liked the most about Dean Koontz books is that whenever he's writing from a character's perspective, you really get into that character and you feel a lot of empathy towards them and you
Right.
want them to win. And he's so good at writing from perspective. He actually wrote one chapter in the Odd Thomas books that's from a dog's perspective. And it was amazing. And then he went on to write an entire book from a dog's perspective after that.
Oh, wow.
And it was brilliant. It was really brilliant. And so when you get into a character's head, you see what they see and you think what they think in his books. And he does a really good job at that. It's hard to capture, I think, what the character's viewpoint is, but
For sure.
you see the movie from the protagonist's eyes, so which is fantastic. Okay,
Cool.
go ahead.
Okay. Um, Before the Coffee Gets Cold, this is by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. This was
Mhm.
September 19th of 2019 by Picador. These books are so popular that the author, like, it was just a runaway hit,
Cool.
like,
Okay.
worldwide. And so
Nice.
the author was encouraged to do like 4 more books based
Wow.
on the concept of this book. So
Yeah.
I have
Did
to
they
I have
get
to
tired by the end? Because it happened to Douglas Adams by the, fifth book of the trilogy. He was just kind of like, "Oh my god, my fans just keep saying more, more, more," and he got really tired of it.
I'll be honest, I was done after the first book. So
Okay.
I don't need 3 more of these books. It's a great book, but I don't
Yeah.
need 3 more.
All right.
Um, okay, so the stories in these books are all interconnected, much like that first novel with Miracles at the General Store that I
Yeah.
mentioned. Time travel is more of a phenomenon versus the technology. So this is a little bit more like the astral projection kind of a situation where it just happens. There's just a a little tear in time, and you can go back and forth.
Right.
So this book explores questions like, what would you change if you could go back in time? More importantly, who would you want to meet? What one thing would you want to do? Or
Mm.
who would you want to see one last time? So
Okay.
here's the premise. In a small Tokyo back alley, there's a cafe that's been serving coffee for over 100 years. And this cafe offers something unique. You can travel back in time. So in the book, Before the Coffee Gets Cold, we meet 4 visitors who hope to use this time traveling opportunity, and they each have a reason. So again, kind of a slice of life where we just are kind of jumping right into specific people's problems.
Yeah.
Um,
So you can go back in time and change the past. That's the
no,
rules allow that. Oh,
you can go back in time,
yeah.
but nothing's going to change.
Wow. Okay. So you're just
But
a
you still,
viewer.
you're not a viewer, you're interacting,
Okay.
but you are, oh, that's a really good question. You
Ineffective.
You are ineffective.
Yeah.
And here's why. Because you have to sit there. There is a special table. It's not a special table, it's just a random table
Mhm.
at the coffee shop. And you can sit there. And when you are served a coffee and you start to stir it with your spoon, that's when the phenomenon starts. You have to come back. No, you have to drink the coffee fully
Mhm.
before it gets cold.
Oh.
I don't remember if bad things happen, like, if you don't finish the coffee, like, maybe you're stuck
Oh.
there in that time, I don't know.
Yeah.
So, you can't get sorry. You also cannot get up from your seat. So,
Okay.
all time traveling events take place at that table in that
Okay.
coffee shop
All right.
within the last 100 years.
Okay.
So,
Wow.
and the different stories, like speaking to your husband who before he got Alzheimer's, seeing, um
He has to
I mean,
come to the coffee shop in order for you to talk to him then, right?
yes.
Yeah.
So that's I mean, this is very, very ridiculous in that, like, the person has to have been a patron at some point,
Sure.
and you can observe them and you can interact with them, but you cannot move from your seat.
Okay.
And, we've got mothers who gave up, children, and then they get to meet, like, the child. Anyway, just things like that.
Oh,
Um
interesting. Okay. Sure.
So they're very emotional. And like I said, these were very, very popular books and they are
Mhm.
really good. One was enough for me. One was enough.
Okay. So this wasn't quite your favorite. Like the Dean Koontz book was my favorite, a 5-star out of 5.
Yeah, I liked the idea. I guess I like that aspect of being able to manipulate time a little bit rather than just observing it and
Yeah.
having a quick 3-minute conversation before my coffee gets cold,
Right.
you know. So, yeah.
Okay. And, it's funny. I sometimes wish that I could go back to like 1996 and buy something on eBay that I passed on.
Mhm.
Like there was a glass paperweight. I collect paperweights, right? Like
Yeah.
glass paperweights. And I remember seeing a paperweight like 5 years ago that came up and it was the final bid was $275. I was like, I can't, that's too much for me. Now same paperweights come back up again and the dude wants 450 for it. And like now it's even worse. I can't afford it. So I have to pass again.
Exactly.
But yeah, kind of now it makes me wish I had bought it at 275, but oh well, c'est la vie.
Um, so yeah,
That's
I
the
thought that go ahead.
sorry, that's kind of the question that comes up in most time travel stories is like, okay, would you go back and would you kill Hitler? It's like, what would you do if you could go back in time? And I kind of prefer the books, I think, where you can't really go back further than like Primer is perfect. You start the
Yeah,
time machine at noon and you can't go back to 8 in the morning. You can
dinosaurs. Yeah.
yeah, you can experience up from noon to 8 p.m. and then you can go back to noon when you turned it on, but you can't go
Yeah.
back to 8 in the morning. I kind of like
I
that premise, that
I found that,
mechanic.
like, the books that I liked, which I don't wanna go into too much about because it'll ruin it, but there is, like, a time loop happening much
Okay.
like the triangle. So there
Yeah.
is a point A and a point B
Mhm.
and traveling back and forth. So it's like within its own little circle.
Sure.
It isn't just like I get to go to
Yeah.
17th century today and,
Now, if you study filmmaking, and I don't, but I know this is a technique, a lot of movies, the ending or the climax will be the first scene.
yes.
And then they'll explain how they got to that point. And so a
Or
lot of
one of the
movies
main
like to be,
characters is the same person
yeah, they
as
like
an
to be
yeah.
circular. And I think oh, okay, the 12 Monkeys with Bruce Willis was like that.
What
Because
was?
the very first scene is a boy at an airport and he sees a man in a Hawaiian
Oh,
shirt
yeah, yeah,
running
yeah,
and
yeah.
gets shot and dies. And then that's the last scene. That's him. So he saw himself when he was a child, and he himself had traveled back in time in the 12 Monkeys. Oh yeah, there's another time travel movie, to the 12 Monkeys, with
They're more
Brad Pitt
prevalent.
was a
Yeah.
Looney Tune. Yeah. So
So, I think we covered a lot of great options. Like, there's a little bit of time travel for everybody, whatever you
yeah, I think
like,
so. I think so.
you know?
And there's always those Star Trek episodes where they warp around the sun fast enough and they go back and save the whales, that kind of thing. That's always kind of
It's
fun. But
important. We gotta save the whales. So
that's right. Yeah. Okay. Good. Well,
okay.
so what shall we talk about next time?
I really wanna talk about dimensions because I have so
Okay.
many books that take place in different dimensions, but
Yeah.
also and I think this is why I'm
Multiverse.
getting multiverse. I get so confused is because one of my favorite a lot of these books that I'm gonna recommend
Yeah.
are different dimensions, but there's also like a time travel or manipulation of time
Oh, okay.
in the dimensions.
Yeah.
So it's so
Okay.
good.
I really liked the Invisible Library books by Genevieve Cogman.
Oh yeah.
Those were fantastic, and those involve, the multiverse and the fae. The fairies
Yeah.
live in high chaos multiverses where magic can exist, and then the
Yep.
dragons live in high physics, low chaos multiverses where they have high technology.
Wow.
That's kind of interesting. Yeah, and so what we live in is mostly a dragon-ish universe with a little magic.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's kind of fun.
Oh, that's
But that's one that I'll
interesting.
talk about, so for sure.
Okay. Well, thank
But
you.
thank you. Great, it was
This was
good.
fun.
Yeah, it was good to chat, so looking forward to doing it again.
Dimensions next time.
Mentions. Thank you.